Good morning, and welcome to the 43rd CALLERLAB Convention in Norfolk, Virginia. Today is March 21st, and this is the surprise Dealing with Unprepared Dancers session. I am Betsy Gotta, and I am the moderator, and to my right is Buddy Weaver, and he is one of our panelists. To my left is Henerlau, also one of the panelists. So as the moderator, I did prepare a handout, and you are all welcome to take them. I'm going to just make a few comments, and then I'm going to let my panelists speak. Some of the possible scenarios that I thought of for unprepared dancers, besides the ones that we're all thinking of, is class invited to the club dance with no warning for the caller. Association class dance with dancers from multiple clubs. Class invited to club with lists sent to caller in advance. That's at least useful. Graduated dancers who cannot perform the calls up to speed. Experienced dancers who cannot perform the calls if they are not called from standard combinations, not just standard positions, but standard combinations. Combinations of really competent dancers and failing dancers, what I call the death square. So, it's the one that you can't get them to an Alaman left no matter how much you sweat bullets. That's the death square. Everybody else is having a great time. So, Mr. Buddy, would you take it away?
Thank you much. Dealing with unprepared dancers, I think we've all heard a comment, I know I have, when you get up and do a dance and somebody, perhaps we're working with another caller, and the caller will say, oh, these folks just can't dance. Oh, they're terrible dancers at that club. I really take umbrage to that statement because for me personally, I don't think there's a such thing as a bad dancer. I really don't. I think dancers can get often categorized as a bad dancer for one of two reasons or a combination thereof. Number one, they weren't properly taught. Perhaps their caller didn't understand the whole concept of teaching and learning in such a way where those folks are able to pick up the material and be able to do it. Perhaps their caller was not able to impart in them some of the techniques, what we call styling, proper dance techniques, so they can transition from one call to the next call. How many of you folks have ever been in a situation where you'll see a floor will break down? The dancers kind of move in an erratic manner. It just doesn't seem like they move one to another. And often we've seen, and I know when I was a beginning caller, that would have been a big surprise to me to see people moving in this erratic manner. I have a theory behind that. The theory is very simple. When these folks are learning to square dance in a class setting, often the caller caters or watches the slowest learner in the room. And so if the call may be a right and left through from a line of 4, he'll have the folks step up, and this is a visual, but they'll step up and they'll do a right and left through and they'll finish their turn. And then the caller's waiting for the slowest dancer in the room to catch up. So folks, after they finish their courtesy turn, they'll do this, which is just to take a half a step back and put their weight back over their hips. It's what I call the at ease position. And if the caller does a right and left through and stops, and then does another right and left through and stops, every single time the dancers do this courtesy turn and step back, hips back, weight over the hips at ease. Now, what this does is it teaches the dancers that that's how square dancing is. It is dance forward with your weight over your hips, stop, throw your hips back, weight on your heels, at ease. And so when they get in front of a caller who's calling one call to the next, let's say the call is right and left through to a flutter wheel. The dancers are doing the right and left through, and now they're used to stopping and putting their weight back on their heels and then doing a flutter wheel. Now all of a sudden they don't have time to do it. Instantly the dancers will say, this caller's too fast. This caller's too fast. Now, in that case like that, am I to stand there and say, well, surprise, the dancers are unprepared? Is it their fault? No. It is whoever taught them. It's their fault. The second person who's at fault is me, because I'm the one up there calling at that very moment. It doesn't take a genius to find what people can't do. It's easy. My daughter, when she was 4 years old, could get it behind the mic and get people to break down. That's very easy. It's more difficult to find what people can do and play on that, play to the strength rather than playing to the weakness. That becomes my focus when I step up to the microphone. So if I'm coming in to do a dance, let's say right here in this beautiful town of Norfolk, Virginia, and I'm walking in, and let's say, well, we've got a lot of students out here. They're about halfway through the class. Now, your halfway through the class, let's say Arlevine, is going to be different than my halfway through a class because teaching orders are suggested. Nothing is legislated in that manner. So your teaching order may place flutter wheel on week number 6, and my teaching order may place flutter wheel on week number 26. So therefore, it's very ambiguous in that setting. So I'm walking up to the microphone. I'm going to assume that these people are not going to be way up here in terms of level of dance. I'm going to assume they're going to be somewhere in the middle, in a large range. So for me as a focus, number one, I've got to find their strength. Now, to find their strength in order so that I don't break them down, because once you break them down, you lose your confidence. And if you break them down on the first call right out of your mouth, you've lost their confidence, and it doesn't matter how good you are moving forward, you can't make a second first impression. The first impression that they have of you is you're going to break them down, especially if I'm sight calling, and we're all familiar with those settings where you come in, the caller is just not a clue in his mind what he's going to do in advance. He's just going to start spitting out calls in a random fashion. We technically call this extemporaneous calling, which is to say, I have not a clue with what I'm going to say. I fire my arrow into the air, and where it lands, I know not where. And that's extemporaneous sight calling. I just say head square through. I have not a clue in my mind if they can do a square through, number one. And I have a kind of an idea of where they're going to be when they're done with the square through. But because some of these folks are beginners, and some of these folks are old-timers, and some of these folks are very old-timers, I have not a clue as to how long that square through will take them. It could take them the standard 10 beats, or it could take them 20 beats, depending upon if they got lost in the middle. Or maybe their caller didn't teach them the square through is reach out. Maybe he taught them with a courtesy turn. I don't know these things. These are all factors. So for me, I'm going to assume they're unprepared. I'm going to come in better prepared than them. Number one for me is my focus. My focus says I'm going to treat the level as a ceiling, as a ceiling rather than a floor. Now that means for me, if the level is basics, let's say as one of the scenarios that Betsy set out, you're coming in to call a class level dance. Class level dance to me says the ceiling is basics. The ceiling is not mainstream. Because I'm not going to assume that they can do a tag the line. Neither will I assume that they could spin chain through. But I'm going to assume that they can do a right and a left through and a courtesy turn. Now, by treating the level as a ceiling, which means I'm not going to go any higher than this. If the highest call in basics is a Ferris wheel, I'm never going to go any higher than Ferris wheel. In fact, I'm going to be looking up at Ferris wheel in a sense of saying it as I'm calling my dance. I'm going to treat everything in the early stages of that list, up and back, right and left through, ladies chain. I'm going to treat those like meaty calls. And so I'm going to assume that they're going to struggle with me because I'm a new voice. I'm going to assume that they've never danced to another caller except their own caller. And I'm going to assume that their caller didn't take the time to teach them how to keep their weight forward over their hips rather than falling with that weight falling back over their heels. And so it's going to be very strong music. The beat will be very strong. Boom, boom, boom. Probably one of the old boom chucky kind of pieces that's not real strongly driven. I didn't bring any music with me. Can you believe a music producer didn't bring any music? This is the first time I've ever come to CALLERLAB without music. Well, yeah, you can find everything on Blue Star, Eric, as a matter of fact. And by the way, Eric, please put all your questions on the microphone. So the idea then for me is to set the tone. I'm going to mention I did a dance here a few months back, and it was a good buddy of mine, and I knew just about all of the students in there. I knew exactly what they could do, and I knew that they could do pretty much anything it called. But I said to my buddy, I said, take it easy. Take it easy on them. Because I knew they weren't going to be used to a new caller and a new voice. And he kind of laid in with the square through, swing through, and boys run. And I said, damn it, I said, take it easy. But you see, that's all relative, isn't it? My idea of easy and his idea or your idea of easy are two different things. Now, as soon as I started calling, I could tell they were broken down. I said, heads go up to the middle and back. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sides forward, up and back. 1, 2, 3, 4. Head, ladies, chain. Go. 1, 2. Side, ladies, chain. 4, ladies, chain. Heads go up and back. Sides go up and back. Allen man left, right and left gram. And they let out a big whoop and a holler on the right and left gram because they did every single thing I called for them. So to me, I wasn't surprised by what they couldn't do because I assumed that they weren't going to be able to do what I want. So I built my program then around the simplest calls, and I built it around the musical beat and proper timing. I've got a couple of scenarios here that I came to mind when we're kind of talking about these different surprise situations. And one, I was in Japan. And I was calling a weekend, and they asked me if I would come into the new dancer hall for about an hour. And I said, of course, absolutely. The new dancers had been dancing 3 weeks. They spoke no English. 95% women. Okay. I thought, well, okay, Mr. Weaver, it's time to dig deep and find something. And so what we got them into the big circle, and then I quickly realized that we had too many people in a too small a room for a big circle dance. So I put them into trios. I don't know if you folks are familiar with that. 3 people dancing side by side, looking like a spoke on a wagon wheel, moving around. And I had every other 3 turn around, so we had 3 people facing 3. And then I moved them around from a circle left, circle to the right, do-si-do. I think there's an old sequence called do-si-dizzy, which used circle left and do-si-do. 3 do-si-do around 3. Right ends, do-si-do around right ends, left end. And I was able to communicate it relatively quickly. I think I had a translator come up and to talk about which one are right ends, which one are left ends. But it took a surprise for me and say, well, I don't know who is less prepared, them or me, because I'm going to go back to my original statement. I mean, we talk about surprise, unprepared dancers, but I think should be renamed surprise, unprepared caller. Because I was not prepared for that. But I was able to turn it around, and we spent an hour on doing very easy things. I don't think I used more than 4 calls in an hour. I think I used do-si-do, and I think I had them promenade, and I had them promenade off to another group. I did a lot of 2-couple and 3-couple stuff in the whole hour. And they had a great time. And when I was done, I walked out. I took my shirt off. I wrung it out. My brow, and I said, thank you, Lord. What a great hour that was. But boy, it was really sweating bullets for the whole hour. And another scenario, say, another scenario that we've all run into when we're out there and we're calling. And you see these folks not only move erratic, but I also have sometimes we've come into situations where folks are talking. They're and especially in maybe not a class setting, but whenever there are new dancers, it almost seems that we have the angels who are well-meaning individuals, but who just feel like they need to talk to the people to get them to tell, no, turn around here and go that way. Now march up and down 5 paces and turn around and march back this way for 6 paces. And I find that for me personally, I'm an audio person. And so I can quickly kind of and everybody will calm down. Because if it continues, they're going to break the floor down, and they're going to break me down, because that talking, that chatter is very disruptive to me. And so there again, I go back to the strong music, and I'll shush them just a little bit and just come down to the easiest fundamentals and let them dance. The only other thing I was going to cover here, and we've got a couple of things I was going to, before I turn it over, because we were talking about different scenarios. And a lot of the scenarios that, we that are in Betsy's handout, excellent handout. Did you all get a copy?
Not yet. I haven't passed it out yet.
You
I want you guys to shine first.
Please put your comments on the microphone, Betsy.
I wanted to focus on my panelists first.
Thank you very much. Excellent scenarios, and we've all got them. And I started thinking about different scenarios where we had, where I was surprised, and I thought, man, this is a challenge. The situation in Japan, and another situation that came to mind when I was thinking about this panel, and this goes probably less to a generality of having dancers who are of mixed experience, but more specifics. And I can think of a time a few years back, we had this one young lady who she had a stiff leg. You know, her leg was set and it was stiff. And she had been dancing for many decades. And a lot of the folks had said, well, we really don't want to get in her square because it breaks down an awful lot. And her husband was an elderly fellow, nicest folks, absolutely sweet folks. And she struggled and struggled. And I started to watch her. And I thought, I think I know what she's struggling with. She's struggling with right and left through. And she's struggling with square through. And she's struggling with anything that required her to make a left turn with a stiff right leg. And I thought, well, how can I make her experience more enjoyable? And I quickly figured out that if she was a head dancer, a head couple, and her husband loved to be in couple number 1 position, heads lead to the right and circle to a line was so smooth for her. She never fell behind. I knew that if she was standing in the center of a line of 4 and I wanted to have those 2 couples switch places, a right and left through was going to cause her a great deal of frustration. But pass through and bend the line twice was perfect for her. She was actually able to pivot on her stiff leg each and every single time. So she bent the line and bent it again. She was no longer at the disadvantage. She was no longer the disabled dancer in the square. She really was on par, if not slightly above par, because of her number of years of experience in square dancing. So in this case, I felt good because really when I left when my schedule became too tight and I had to give up a lot of my weekday programs, and that was one of the weekday programs I gave up, they quit dancing. They said, you know, you've given us the best years of our square dancing career, and we know we really will not enjoy elsewhere, and I encourage them to continue on. But I knew at the end of the day, I gave them the best years because I found her strength and played to her strength, whereas a lot of other guys would have just said, well, she can't dance. She can't dance. No, it's not that. I would remind you that when you're tempted to say to yourself, they can't dance, take yourself away from that and refocus it and look back at yourself. No, it's me. I can't call to them. And if that's the case, then you need to develop more material, more of a sense of empathy and putting yourself and looking at folks and figuring out why can't the guy who's got the eye patch on his left eye, why can't he do a clover leaf? I can tell you why. Because he doesn't know what's over to his left-hand side. I can tell you why when he can't separate around one, because put your hand over your left eye, and I would like you to dance that way. And every right-hand turn is easy, but every left-hand turn is a challenge. When you think about that, and you see them on the floor, now you are no longer unprepared. Now you are thinking ahead, and you are ahead of the problem. And with that, I thank you for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Buddy.
You know, I want to dovetail on what Buddy said there about the teaching aspects of this thing. When you're coming to a dance and you're calling a dance, you don't know who's showing up at the dance until they actually walk in the door. It's one of those things. Rarely do you get reservations ahead of time. So when you have it out there, you have a floor of dancers, and you're calling, and one of the things we often talk about doing is just sussing the floor. And we call it first tip to find out, hey, what do these people know or don't know, right? So we kind of do a sussing of the floor. We call that first tip, and we find out, okay, maybe we got some people who are really good over here. They can do what the program is, and maybe these people over here, maybe something that's not quite clicking. Am I calling it right? Did I say it right? Do I have a speech impediment? Do I sound like Buddy Weaver? I don't know. So you know, you have to be cognizant of these things. There could be several factors that go into that, and you don't know what they are starting out. So part of sussing the floor is not only establishing what their abilities are, but kind of establishing what they don't know, as Buddy says, and finding out why don't they know? Why can't they do what you're asking them to do? What are the issues coming up against that? And there could be several factors that go into that. Clearly, one of them could be age. There could be just people who are learning to dance at an older age, where it takes a longer time to actually get the information into them. Many of us learned to dance when we were very young, myself included. And when you're 20 years old, it's easy to learn how to square dance. No big deal. But I teach mostly people who are much older than 20, and it takes a while for people to understand and process the calls. And you have to recognize that, because just because we know the calls inside and out, I'm getting a fuzz there. Okay, just because we know the calls inside and out doesn't mean that they're going to have the same understanding of those calls that we do. And it may take years for them to get the same fully internalized feeling of what those calls will be. And so what we see and what seems obvious to us may not seem so obvious to the dancer on the floor. So are they unprepared, or are they just in the process of still... or the process of still learning what the calls are? Also, Buddy mentioned an important aspect of this. It could be a function of poor teaching. Where do these dancers come from, and who taught them how to dance? Not to lay blame on a caller, but to recognize that, say, caller X over here maybe isn't the best or most skilled teaching caller, and maybe these dancers coming in don't have the proper background to dance the dance we're dancing. Which then goes to the question, so what do you do? Well, I have one person, I was thinking of an example of one person in my group, and this couple is a mature couple, and they've been in my beginner class, they're smiling, they're great people, and she kind of moves a little bit slower, no physical handicap that I know of, she just moves a little slower, and I find out after 4 months that she has some degree of Alzheimer's. So now she's in my beginner class, okay? So the husband really likes it, so they keep cycling through my beginner class, like beginner class, the first parts of it. And he's kind of moving on to some other stuff, and she kind of sits and watches later. But she, if we can get her through a square through 4, swing through, boys run, Ferris wheel, that's a good night, after a year. So that's where that one's at. So is she poorly prepared, or is that just her limits? That's kind of probably her limits. But she has a great time. I hear from her husband, man, she loves coming to square dancing every Wednesday night. It's the biggest thing for her. And we make accommodations for that. We make accommodations. I don't say it in a bad way. I say it in a good way. It's good that she's part of our community. We have a big enough group that she can, be part of it, so nobody's dancing with her all night long. So it goes all the way around. Also, if you're looking at the floor out there and you seem to have unprepared dancers, well, maybe there's something about what you're doing and how you're calling and presenting it is not communicating it effectively to the point where they understand what you want. So are you fully prepared in how you're going to communicate your program that night? When you're up there and you're going to call something, you have an idea. I'm going to call this program, whatever it might be, and you go down this road and you find out they have no idea what you're talking about. Really, are they unprepared, or are you unprepared for really what they're expecting going into this program? Because you got to make sure your expectations and their expectations somewhat align with each other as you're going down that. In a lot of parts of the country, we have plus level as a destination program, right? We see that. A lot of mainstream to it, thank goodness. But there's a lot of plus level out there. And how much plus level is really actually good, solid plus, where they know all the mainstream calls and all the plus calls, can execute them at least from standard position accurately? Fewer and fewer. And I love the way that Tim Crawford said this Tim Mariner said this the other day. We were kind of mashing mainstream and plus together. You know what you get? Mush. And that's what we're dancing. We're dancing a lot of mush out there, which is dancers who are not very well prepared. They crash all the way up through to the plus program with very little time to practice and understand the calls in the meantime. So you have people coming to, say, a plus dance, if you're doing a plus dance, and what they have behind them is a huge amount of material they had to learn in a short time, and they don't really understand very much of it at all. So we have mush. And so that's a function of the culture we're in. It's a function of the club saying we got to get them to plus, we got to run through the beginner class, we got to do all these things, we got to do it in 3 weeks and whatever. So maybe they're unprepared, but they're also unprepared because of all of us as callers and as clubs that we push them to that level that quickly. But the important thing to recognize, so with all that, the important thing to recognize is they are there because they wanted to come in and have fun. So they actually showed up at your doorstep. So they might be might be dancers that aren't really well prepared, but they actually showed up at your dance, right? That's a great thing. It's a good thing to have dancers there. So you think, okay, I need to dial back my expectations of what I'm thinking is going to happen here. They walked in the door to have a good time, right? What am I going to do now to change myself, because I'm the professional here, right, to make sure that they have a good time and they walk away with a good experience saying, wow, that was a great dance. Maybe I learned a little bit, maybe not, doesn't matter, but I had a great time. That's the important thing. So I have to change my thoughts and my expectations and my feelings about the dance to make sure that they're going to be satisfied in what they expect when they're coming in the door. Now, that said, you got to make sure the dance program that's advertised, what you're calling, what they're coming in, have somewhat of an alignment with each other, right? If they're a plus dancer walking into an advanced hall, maybe that's not the appropriate thing for them. So you have to do that too. They're enthusiastic. They showed up. They're enthusiastic, and you cannot kill that enthusiasm. You want to make sure they're happy because, of course, if they're happy, they'll go out and get their other friends to join square dancing. And if they're not happy, they'll kill it for you, just like that. They came there because they wanted to dance with their friends too. They could be there because they maybe, and this I saw this at this festival we just did last weekend, a lot of mainstream dancers who know a little bit of plus went into the plus hall to dance. Why? Because that's where their friends are. Their friends are dancing in there. They want to go there. In reality, they should be dancing in the mainstream hall, but nobody wants to dance in the mainstream hall because my friends are over there in the plus hall. So now you got a whole bunch of people who really shouldn't be in that hall. They're dancing there, but that's where their friends are. So how do you make accommodations for that? And there's a couple different ways to do that. You can change you can change your format of the dance and saying what you're doing. And you could say, well, I was going to do a full plus dance, but I've got these people out here who really can't do all that stuff. So one thing I've done from time to time is call what I'll call, for lack of a better word, a soft plus dance or a mush dance, right? A mush, something easier, something kind of directional, keep people through it. But then I might say that in a break I'll say, I've only been using some of the plus calls. This next tip will be using all the plus calls. I'll use all of them in a more complete way. And you should only dance this tip if you know every single plus call from a lot of positions. Trying to give people a warning. Say, for the plus dance, the true plus dance, if you want something here, you can do this tip. Other than that, we're going to kind of make it easy for everybody to do it along. It's really up to the caller to deal with the situation. I mean, you can have the situation of the dancers out there that are not prepared, but ultimately you have to be prepared for that situation. You may not like it, and you can certainly go back and have a conversation with the teachers or the clubs or the callers afterwards and say, let's do something so that we can make this a better situation next time. But it's ultimately up to us as the caller standing up here to accommodate all this. I want to read something that Harlan Kerr, who is not in the room. Harlan not in the room, right? Harlan gave me his laptop. I want to thank him for that. Now I got 2 laptops, and he has 0. This is a survey he gives out to his dancers, at the advanced and challenge level, for them to self-evaluate whether they are ready to move on to the next program. So he modified the words here for Mainstream Plus. Here are the 8 questions that his dancers have to answer for themselves. 1, can I dance the basic, Mainstream, and Plus with a high level of competency? 2, do I rarely make errors at Plus, and when I do, can I understand what didn't work? 3, at a Plus dance, do I dance 95% of the sequences without error? 4, at a Mainstream dance, do I dance over 98% of the sequences without error? 5, am I able to spend some time, about an hour, each week studying the calls and concepts? Well, that might be a lot to ask for a Mainstream dancer, but yeah. 6, do I like being able to learn and understand calls and apply that understanding to unique situations? 7, do I like being challenged to think about calls in an unusual way? 8, most importantly, am I motivated and committed to learning this exciting program? Motivation goes a long way. So that's something on the dancer side for dancers to ask themselves, am I happy where I am, or do I want to go learn something else? So that they know before they step into another program, if they're a basic dancer going to mainstream dancer going to plus or whatever, that they are in fact making a conscious decision that this is the right thing for them. So it's a two-way thing. We're looking at how the dancers are coming into us to see, are they prepared or not prepared? And this is a way for the dancers to kind of mitigate themselves from being in a position where they're not prepared, going to a dance they're not really ready for. So those are my thoughts on the matter. Betsy?
All right. Thank you, Eric. I might as well talk also on some of the stuff that I had that does not reflect or may build upon what Buddy and Eric have said. I arrived many years ago. Actually, I'm going to... What Eric was saying about the mush reminded me of a story. A caller who no longer calls, and I will not name the name, was calling in our area way back, this would be early 80s, I think, when we still had +1 and +2 before we combined the list. And the man had a great choreographic mind, and he usually called advanced and challenge, and he was calling as easily as he knew how, and the squares on the floor were not doing anything. And he tried the first tip, and they were all breaking down. And he tried the next tip, and they were all breaking down. And his wife came up to him in the next break, and she says, "This is a +1 club. What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm trying to find which one." And he was just totally frustrated, but it was like they couldn't seem to dance any of the plus calls. It's because the caller who called for them regularly did not call extemporaneous. They called set patterns. And I've heard this from John Kaltenthaler, and I quoted it because it's true. You go out to a club, and you're sussing the floor, as Eric said, and you call head square through 4, swing through, and then you go and pretend you have to clear your throat to see if the boys run or they do a spin the top. It's only funny because it's true. Otherwise, it's just frustrating. But if they do that, you know that you have a group of dancers who have been conditioned to dance to set patterns. The problem is that you don't know what their set patterns are, and you as a caller may think entirely differently from their caller. So you have to start fishing gently as to what they're used to, and then be able to take them away from that if you want them to dance to you with a degree of comfort. I myself have had the experience where I've walked into a club and they said, "Oh, we're so glad you're here. We invited our class." And I said, "That's really super. What does the class know?" "I don't know." And to this day, I carry CALLERLAB program lists. And there's always, when I'm calling, there's a program list in front of me if I'm calling a whole dance, because I want to check periodically to see what I haven't called in the night. My goal on calling any CALLERLAB program, if I'm calling a whole night, is to call every single call on the program. Sometimes I fail, but I try to call every single call on the program. And I will check and go, "Oh, I haven't done that. I haven't done that." But so I carry extra lists. My lists are color coded because I think that way. So if I'm looking down at the table, it's a blue list, I'm calling mainstream. If it's a lavender list right now, I'm calling C1. But just the color of the list tells me what I'm looking for. So I carry white sheet of paper with the lists on them so I can have a highlighter, and you get a class member. Which calls do you recognize that you know? Because they won't know the names of them. My theory on that is that dancers, unless they get really sophisticated, learn to understand the language of square dancing. They do not learn to speak it. We as callers have transitioned into becoming more fluent in speaking the language of square dance. That's why a newer caller can't come up with the right words, because they don't yet speak the language. They recognize the language. So, but the new dancer will recognize calls if they see them on the page, and that will give me a base to work from. Then I do what Buddy was talking about with whatever they've all had is the ceiling. I'm going to start with a couple of calls on what I consider early in the teaching order and work with them for a tip. Then I'm adding 2 or 3 more. Then I'm adding a couple more until, and if I've been given a list of what they know, I will not call everything I've been told that they've been taught until the last part of the dance. Each tip I'm going to add calls to see if they're comfortable with those calls and build on what I've done. So that's one of the ways I try and make things work. And I will do that anyway with regular dance. I'll theme around a certain tip. Old-time stuff. Way back when in the 60s, we used to walk through the singing call patterns, before the singing call. Now, we don't necessarily want to do that in this day and age, but what I do is I will use, if I have a call that I'm going to highlight for the singing call, that's used in the patter more than once, because I want to see if they succeed. If I'm planning on theming around spin chain the gears, which I know is a lesser known call these days because everybody does spin chain and exchange the gears, but God forbid we should call spin chain the gears because they'll exchange anyway. But if I call that a couple of times during the patter and they don't succeed, my singing call figure is going to be different than what I had planned. And that's how I can get me to understand whether or not they have a chance of succeeding in the singing call figure. Buddy was talking about stop and go, where they rock back and they get back on their weight. A lot of timing these days is stop and go. The dancers come to a halt, and then they do another call and come to a halt. So that you lose your advantage of body flow, you lose your advantage of momentum in your timing, so that the dancers, when you call properly timed dancing, they say you're really fast. It's not because the tempo's fast, it's because they're used to coming to a halt, rocking back and resting. One of the things I deal with, if you have dancers who are struggling, any success is complimented. Keep your sequences short. Give them the Alaman left and the grand right and left and the walk of triumph promenade home. And it is a walk of triumph if they're promenading home and the other square had to just square up. And they'll feel that. If you think it will help, cue a call, but don't give them every single word that you would use when you were teaching it. But keep an eye on the floor. Mike Jacobs used to say that calling was like triage. There are the squares that are succeeding fine. There are the squares that are going to bleed to death no matter what you do. That's what I call the death square. And there are the squares that, with a little bit of help, will succeed, and you have to be aware of them and give them the help and the extra beat or two that they need, and sacrifice your timing for their success. Don't do it all the time, but give them most of it. If there's clusters of squares that have gathered together in self-defense against the ones they don't want to dance to, find a way to mix them up for a little bit. Say, we're going to do something different this tip. Okay, all the heads pass through and promenade to another square. They may hate you, but... But if they don't succeed, you're not going to get hired back anyway, so you might as well try to make something to have everybody have a good time. Maybe they'll decide it was fun. Bring them back someplace after the end. Mix the ladies. Have the ladies run away to another square. Bring them back for the singing call. Relax it. Okay. Now, one of the people came up to me and said, what do I do, or can you talk about what we do if the dancers can't keep up with the singing call figure? And then my answer is have what I call short-timed singing call figures prepared and in your head to call. It may, say they're dragging behind and now I've gone into the next sequence. And never mind that I didn't sing the lyrics because they were too far behind. They hadn't gotten to the promenade. I know I'm in the next sequence. And my next singing call figure for them may be as simple as head square through 4, swing your corner, because that's all the time I have. Now they're promenading with the beat, and I'm singing the lyrics, and we get back on. But the first figure that I used is now never going to work. I need to have something else in my head to let them succeed. Fall back on half a chicken plucker if you've been taught that. Head star through, pass through, right and left through, pass through, trade by. If you're calling pretty much anything except a class dance, they probably can succeed through that. It's short times. So what happens when they get up to speed and you've run out of things? Have something available as filler. Say they're facing their corner in an 8-chain through position. Okay, and you're ready to swing their corner, and you know you have extra beats. This is stupid, but it'll work. Pass through, you turn back, swing your corner. And you can do that even for brand new beginners. You can have pass through, turn around, swing your corner. Surprise! But they've succeeded. And you don't need to use scoot back, or as I've been known to use once in a while, everybody fold. If they're in a wave, Eric's looking at me funny. You say everybody fold, they stop, they think, they turn around and they look at you really weird and swing their corner because they're right there. If they're in a wave and whatever, you can have the centers trade twice. If they, it's like, oh, I got them to a wave, touch a quarter. Oh, they don't know, scoot back. Centers trade. Centers trade. Have those in your head. Learn them so that you are prepared to take up, what they aren't quite sure of, and you can cause them to succeed. Our goal is to get the dancers to succeed. Plain and simple. Give lots of hints where the dancers should be. I got facing lines. I was really hoping for 4 boys in the middle. I don't always get my wishes, but I was really hoping for. And of course, sometimes the dancers will get a chuckle out of that. What I try and do, if I can, is if I have a square where they're not symmetrical anymore, gender-wise, and if I can get the people in the middle, so say I have 4 boys in the middle, but there's really three boys and 1 girl in this square, if I can have the centers pass through and turn back, so the girl that's in the middle is right in front of the boy that should be in the middle, they can switch. I can bring them as close as possible so they can switch without anybody noticing. And it doesn't affect the other squares. So if I can make it so that they can succeed that way, I will do that. Anything else here? Look at the whole room. We all know about the sight caller who is watching their sight square. And they're watching their sight square. And no other square in the room is moving, let alone the square. Yeah, the place where you get the people that are having trouble is usually in the back of the room. Keep your eyes on the back of the room. Trust your sight squares. If you're sight resolving, trust your sight squares to do the dancing and then come back to them and go, oh yeah, well they're not right. Okay, let's go over here. And never have one. Unless you're only calling to one square, never depend on one square, and it is not the sight square's job to make it right for you. I truly hate, and I've heard it more than once, I truly hate the phrase, oh, well, my sight square broke down, so I can't resolve. Excuse me, it's not their job to dance it perfectly for us. It's our job to know where we are and figure out a way to get out of it and make them succeed. Keep the patter short. I don't mean just the sequences. If you've got a couple of squares that are struggling really hard, every extra minute in that patter set will seem like forever. If you cut it short, and when we're on digital and we loop, I don't care that there are monitors over there saying, oh, you've called for 7-8 minutes in this patter. You won't necessarily pay attention to it. Pay attention to the monitors. Watch out for the loop that you all of a sudden your tip is like 40 minutes long or something. But if squares are struggling, keep the patter short, because then they'll take a break and maybe they'll get a better square, a better combination of dancers. Sometimes it's a combination of dancers. It isn't any one dancer that's a bad dancer. It's something doesn't mix. I have been in squares where I knew every dancer there, and they were perfectly comfortable at the program we were supposed to be dancing, and we couldn't do a doggone thing. I have no idea why, but it was like everybody went to lunch, just not physically. If the club has set a list of the calls that have been taught to a new group, start by building a theme with the newest, the oldest calls, and build to the newest. That's kind of what Buddy said before. Yeah, and as I said, call try and call all of the calls on the list. But I have a friend who calls, and he goes, how do I want to say it? He goes into workshop mode immediately upon any failure on any square on the floor. And it's like, no. The first time they hear this call, after they've been to 4 dances and haven't heard it in those dances, they may have learned it, but it takes them a second or so for it to come back. Give it to them again, give them a hint or two, and they may succeed. My rule of thumb is at least 3. If I called a certain call 3 times and had major failure, I either have to workshop it or that's all I'd call it for the night. But don't go start talking about workshopping, stop the music and run into the definition right away. Give them a chance to succeed. Give them a couple helper words. Let them have a good time. As I said, and I'll say it again, praise everything. And I invented this a while ago I used it for new dancers because they're so scared. I mean, if that ceiling panel fell down and a new dancer danced, somebody on that floor would go, "Oh, I'm so sorry, that ceiling fell down." And they'd mean it. They believe everything that happens is their fault. So we have the Olympics. I watch the gymnasts and the skaters especially. And square dancers focus on what we did wrong. Every single square dancer goes, well, this was a good tip, except I did this wrong, and I screwed this up. And now, Roy, my husband, is a big baseball fan. We called in Cooperstown, and we go to the Hall of Fame the next day. And the guys in the Hall of Fame bat about 350 max. That's 1 in 3. So why do we square dancers need 1,000% to succeed? We don't need that, but we have to teach people to be comfortable with variations. And so I tell the newer dancers to kind of disarm them. All right, be like the gymnasts and the skaters. No matter what happened in your routine, at the end, finish. I want to see, ta-da, at the end. What it does is it relaxes them. It makes them chuckle, and they may even remember and do a ta-da whether or not they succeeded. I've seen ta-das on the floor after I've mentioned that. I give you permission to take that away and give the ta-da to every dancer that you want to. Okay, Buddy and Eric, do you have more to add? So, Buddy has some stuff to add.
Well, if you want to, I want to add a couple things in there to kind of tie in what you're talking about too. Where was I going with this? We were talking a little bit about, folks being able to keep up and stuff like that, and praising. I like the idea of praising. And when you do offer a call and the dancers don't get it, I like the idea of doing it 2 more times. But make sure when you do it the second time, put those folks with a different group. So if the first time you had the head square through 4 and you had them do a diddly squat and they couldn't do it, we'll put them over with the right-hand lady and do it again and see if they did better. Because it is all about the team that's working. And I've been sometimes in cases where the guy got up there and he felt the need to immediately start workshopping something. Gee, my favorite call in the world is cloverleaf. So you don't know how to do a cloverleaf? Well, I'm going to teach it to you. Look at your focus. What are you there for that day? If I'm coming in and doing a student dance, then I'm just going to call. And if they don't know the call, it's not my job to teach them that call. And they probably wouldn't appreciate my teaching it. Neither would their regular teacher appreciate my teaching it. And so that being said, call to what they know. We were talking earlier, too, about the idea that folks are unable to keep up. And I kind of skipped over it, but we talk about timing. I mentioned earlier, I said, if you call a square through, and some folks are taking 10 beats, and some folks are taking 20 beats. And I've often run into callers who've said, well, they're a little slower, so I'll give them 15 beats to do a square through. I personally think you are doing a huge disservice to the dancers by screwing with the timing list. And timing was put together by many brilliant people in the business. One of the guys who I absolutely had the utmost respect for was Dick Ledger. And he spent an awful lot of time with timing. And there's a reason why a lady's chain takes 8 beats, not 18 beats. Now, that having said that, if I'm calling for a group that I feel is going to be dancing a little bit slower, there's a difference between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on a ladies' chain versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The difference is tempo versus timing. The two are unrelated. Tempo is a music. It's a measure of music. Tempo is versus, that's your beat. That's your beats per minute. And if your dancers are struggling a little bit, if you're in a situation where you're suddenly calling and the people aren't able to keep up with you, bring your music down a little bit. Don't bring it down while you're playing it. I've been there sometimes. I remember the old turntables, and the guy would have it cranked up at 45 and realize it's too fast, and take his finger and kick that slide knob down and go boom 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 boom. Oh God! So stop the music. Bring your tempo down, but don't mess with timing. Because if 8 beats is what a ladies' chain is, then 8 beats is what a ladies' chain is. And if they need more time, then slow it down to a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Chain her back, a 1, 2, 3, 4. But when you start messing with timing, I think it's a mistake, folks. Sometimes mess up on the dancing too for lack of proper styling skills. They don't know where to place their hands properly. You might put them into a line of 4 and they don't recognize a line of 4. You might have them doing a pass through, bend the line, and they haven't recognized their back in a new line because they were never trained perhaps by the caller who was teaching them how to properly touch hands. That's a different topic, and I would invite you to attend that session that I'm doing with Jim Mayo on dance technique. I don't remember who else is on the program, but it's going to be a good one. And one other thing, and I'll leave it alone, the short singing call figures, because I was here too when he was asking about it. One of the great ways that you can help dancers who are struggling, if they have a physical impairment or they're just geriatrically challenged, they just need a little bit more time. I'm not going to. What I find is singing calls. I assume you all do singing calls, correct? Is there anybody in this room who does not call singing calls? Eric Henerlau. Thank you very much. But singing calls, typically, once you hit your swing, your corner, and promenade, there's typically, and I happen to know a little bit about square dance music, we allow 16 beats of music to sing, okay, for a full promenade. Okay, 16 beats of music to promenade them. And typically, if they're on most of our fingers, they're swinging them close to their home position. So that's a 16-beat promenade to bring them all the way back around. But what if you gave the dancers an 8-beat promenade, but still gave them 16 beats of music to dance with? Would you mind? Could we push back a little bit? I'd like to put a square right here in the front, if you don't mind. And I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. We just would like to have, if we could get 8 dancers up here, since this was a question asked from the folks, if we could show you shortened singing call figures. I'd like to give you a couple. I'm sure that Moderator and Panelists would also give you a couple. And we're going to use it with live action music. And this music is played at 126 beats a minute. Doesn't need to be any darn slower than that. Okay, you kids have enough room to bring your joint hands. Yeah, bring your joint hands and just stretch way out. Just stretch way out. Okay, now bring your square in close. All right, so here we go. We're going to just dance a singing call, a couple of singing call figures, where I'm going to give the folks just that 8-beat promenade. Let's see how I'm going to do this. Come. Yes. I kind of noticed that.
They're begging for mercy already.
Head couple promenade outside. Halfway round the ring you go. Sides square through in the middle and 4 hands. Meet the 2, then a right and left through. Veer left. Ferris wheel around, the center square through. 3-hand around you do. Swing your corner, girl, and promenade. 8-beat promenade now. I can't live a lie running for my life. I will always want you. Head square through, 4 hands round you do. Meet the sides, a right and left through now. Veer to the left, Ferris wheel around. Zoom, centers pass through, star through, slide through, smile. Swing your corner, girl, here's your 8-beat promenade. I can't live a lie, running for my life. I will always want you. And there you go. So those are 2 easy examples. Now, we gave the dancers an 8-beat promenade, so even dancing on this plush rug, you had time to get home, catch your breath, and get ready for the next figure, and you were never rushed. Now, timing-wise, it meant that you had to stop at home, whereas I prefer to keep the dancers moving so that when you're coming to home, if my next figure is heads promenade half, as you're coming close to your home, I'm already calling the heads promenade half, so that heads don't stop at home and then promenade half. They have the sensation of continuously dancing their way into the next call. So you'll lose that. But for the dancers who need that extra time, that'll work.
One of the things that I do is that a lot of times we start our singing call figures with heads square through 4. You can square up again, guys. We don't have to play music because I'm not going to sing.
It's beautiful music.
I know, but I don't know the song,
Sorry,
so I can't do it.
It's one of my new releases, by the way, too.
Okay. You're not supposed to advertise. Okay. So anyway, have the heads promenade halfway, sides star through and pass through. Now we have just done a square through 4 equivalent, and I've put the dancers on the other side of the square. You do the whole rest of the figure, you have an 8-beat promenade, because they're going to finish across. If the figure normally finishes at home, this time it'll finish across the square, and you have the 8-beat promenade. So you just change the square through 4 to something that will flip them. If you have like the heads promenade while the sides star through pass through, you've got the square through equivalent. The rest of the singing call figure can be the same one that you were using after square through 4.
And if you have plus dancers, use the plus calls for what they're meant for. Fillers. Load the boat and relay the deucey. Only take the people. Come back to your home position, if you would. Come back to your home position. And I'll give you a working example. What would be a technical equivalent to a load the boat? Anybody? Star through or slide through, correct? Yeah, so let's say we're going to imagine now the heads have done a square through. Go ahead, heads just step forward and turn your back on your partner and look at your corner. Okay, so that's your equivalent of a square through. Slide through. Now, right here we know we're pretty darn close. We can go ahead and load the boat. Go, load the boat. Now we know that's the equivalent of a slide through, correct? All right. And now we can do a slide through twice. And if we could swing your corner, if we could swing it, but we won't. It's just a hypothetical. It would be your corner, and it would be an 8-beat promenade. Okay? Come back to home. You're just halfway across. Another plus call that is... you should have let him promenade. It would have been easier. Heads square through... Wait. No, we're doing the equivalent of square through. So head step forward, turn your back on your partner, and you're looking at your corner. That's your equivalent of your square through. We can do-si-do, but we don't have to, because we're going to imagine we are now do-si done, and step to an ocean wave. Okay? Now, if you want to build some dance flow to it, we can have the girls trade and then do a relay the deucey. Okay? Now, the relay the deucey action, I'm assuming you folks dance plus. It's going to have the net effect of taking the entire square and moving it just 90 degrees out. Okay? Yeah, so we can have the girls cross-fold. And, you know who it is. That's your corner. Now, if you were to swing, that would give you another 8-beat promenade. In many cases, we use these load the boats in such a way where it brings them back to a home and then swing and the full promenade. Or the relay the deucey, do an all-night circulate twice to swinging. That gives you full promenade. So one of the ways, and I forgot who asked that question. Who asked that question?
Jerry did, right here in front.
You asked a question about about shortening your singing call figures. That's how I would do it. I would have them always swing their corner across from their original home. So that's your home is right across the street over there. You're number 3 man. You're swinging her right now at what would be considered almost the number 1 position. Your promenade is going to take you about 8 beats, maybe 7. Maybe it could even be less in some cases. Okay, go.
One of the other things you can do, you guys can sit. Thank you so much, Spotlight Demo Dancers. Yay! Give them a round of applause. One of the other things you can do is look for the fluff. Look for what takes the dancers, time to get out checkers. I don't care that we can do things on computer. Time to push checkers. Push checkers through your singing call figure. Analyze where they are actually when the singing call, when they're ready to swing their corner, and what else is added afterwards. A lot of times singing call figures may have a touch a quarter and a scoot back, or once or twice. All of that is added fluff. If you want to shorten that singing call figure, take out the touch a quarter and the scoot back. Take out the do-si-dos. Thank you, Lynn. Take out the do-si-dos. And we're running out of time. We're having a great session, I think. Thank you all for being here. We're running out of time, but do we have any other questions that people want to bring up? Here, Don. Have we run it out of battery?
No.
Okay.
No, this wasn't on, I think.
Okay.
Don Casper from Mannheim, Germany. The question would be, if you're at a dance like was mentioned, and you have your ceiling, as you mentioned before, how much non-standard positioning would you put in there? Half sashayed or lefts or something like that? Of the known figures, they know how to do a square through. Would you attempt a left square through? Would you attempt a square through 4 boys in the middle or something like that?
In my opinion, that's going to depend upon the culture you're coming from. And now, when I was back in Europe at the time, calling an awful lot over there, the culture was you spent a year learning basics, and so if at the time, so we could count on doing it a half sashayed square through, the left square throughs. If that's not the case, the difference in philosophy, floor versus ceiling, is if you look at historically when our levels were created. And Melton will tell you, Melton Luttrell standing back there, he'll tell you when these levels were created, it was to stop so much new material coming in. It was to halt it. It was to keep it from going any higher than that. But if you flash ahead 40 years, many callers look at this, instead of a ceiling, I can't go any higher, we look at it as you can't dance any lower than that. And the difference is a mentality that you approach. One mentality says, I'm here to entertain, and one mentality says, I'm here to test. And I want you to think about that. Okay, and that's going to be, and if you're running into dancers who are challenged, you can test them, as long as you're willing not to get hired back, and as long as you're willing to get that reputation.
Yeah, in the U.S., Eric, do you have any opinion on that? In the U.S., I would probably do very little half sashayed or left-handed stuff unless I touched on it with a spoon. I try periodically a left touch a quarter, and it creates fascinating things.
Yeah, no, but you know what I probably would do is I probably have the heads go forward and back, and head ladies do-si-do, and the head men do a do-si-do. You see, I'm pulling from the calls that they learned very early in their program, and I'm giving it to them in such a different way. Now that's variety without testing them. I'm not testing them. I know that they know the difference between a boy and a girl, and so that's not a test. It's just variety without driving him into the ground. I might put him into a line of 4, and I might say the end 2 ladies diagonally do-si-do. And everybody else, well, how'd they do? Give them a nice hand. Wasn't that beautiful? Now the end 2 boys do it. Now the center 2 boys. Now the end center 2 girls. Blah, blah, blah. Okay? Correct.
Or pass through in a U-turn back and just the center's ladies chain. Line of 4. Facing lines of 4, standard position, pass through, U-turn back, just the center 2 ladies chain across. He's thinking.
That's a center 2 couples.
Yeah, the center 2 couples are doing a ladies
yeah.
chain. But if you tell the ladies, the men will do their courtesy turn because they like to put their arms around the women. Other questions? I think, yes, I think we're actually a little past our time. We thank you for your participation. 11:45 is lunch. Come and get the handout.
Come and get the handout.
It should be on the thumb. It should be on the thumb drive too. Yes, it was sent in time. If you like paper, go ahead.
There you go.